Hey everyone, RogueGold here, and today I bring you part 2 to my analysis of the Division 2's current PvP discussions and commentary. I made a video 2 days ago now talking about some of the more present issues plaguing the game right now, specifically the Intimidate and Adrenaline Rush meta and how talents set up under Gear 2.0 are affecting that. But like I mentioned in that video, that's only half the battle, and today I want to discuss a subset of that issue that has unfortunately been hurting this franchise's PvP ever since the Division 1 way back in 2016. Now before we get started, if you missed that first video that I did and you want to watch it before this one or after or whenever, I'll have a card up on screen for it right now as well as a tag at the end of the video. Or of course you can just go to my channel and find it there. That being said, let's get into it. Alright, no fluff here, let's just cut to the chase. The issue is tanks. If you're new to the franchise, or maybe you've just forgotten, tank builds have been problematic ever since the early days of Division 1. They've dominated many metas, often due to their abuse and ability to gain high damage talents and setups, and it's always proved to just be a point of weakness on the devs' part in balancing them, because they're often just not even close. Let's just do a quick recap on some of the most notable tank metas. The earliest one I can recall is Tankticians in update 1.3 of the Division 1. There people were able to get very high levels of toughness and skill power to give them crazy heals, and basically resulted in them being unkillable. Then in 1.5, during the Alpha Bridge metas, people made some pretty crazy tank damage hybrids, and perhaps most notably because it's still ongoing to this day, is 1.8 with Classifieds, where for God knows why, they made several of the sets scale with stamina to grant you weapon damage, and then left the game off there when Div 2 came out with no further balancing passes, so they'll never go in and change it again. Then in Div 2, the majority of Year 1 was dominated by 3-11-7 builds, where people were able to get very tanky, have large amount of heals to stay alive, as well as having high-powered weapons, usually shotguns, so that worked out great. TU8 remedied this for a short time with Gear 2.0 and brought a quick TTK back to PvP until quickly True Patriot and Efficient made sure that no one ever died, while the Pestilence bled you to death. And as soon as that was corrected with Incoming Repair, we're now right back where we started with full armor builds having healing in the form of armor regen and high bonus armor buffs, and gaining ridiculous levels of weapon damage with the Lady Death. Which, let's talk about the Lady Death quick before we get to the bigger implications of tank builds. Like I said in the last video, I thought the Lady Death discussion in the current meta was more applicable to this video, and that's because currently it's at its most broken when in the hands of a 6 blue core user. Even if they nerf the thing, it's still going to shred on a 6 red build, but quite honestly, I'm fine with that because then you're fighting someone who has 700,000 armor and not 2 freaking million. If you're in a group of 4, you can melt down a 6 red user who's trying to push you, but good luck in consistently doing the same for someone with 6 blues. So yes, I think the Lady Death needs a nerf. I'm sorry if you don't like nerfs or if you disagree or whatever, but this thing just does too much. And it's a different situation than Intimidate and Adrenaline Rush. In my last video, I suggested that instead of nerfing them, the devs could re-implement talent requirements to ensure they couldn't be used together. However, in this case, the Lady Death is an exotic, and the core philosophy of exotics is that they have no barrier of entry. They work the same for everyone, everywhere, and they're balanced for that. Now, as far as how I think it needs to be nerfed, I actually saw someone give a suggestion that could be very effective in reducing its power without directly nerfing the damage, and that's to make it function similar to Striker in Div 1, where you can't build stacks when you're out of combat and you lose them upon exiting combat. That way, you have to stay mobile while in a fight in order to gain the damage. Beyond that though, I think either a reduction in stack damage or how quickly you gain stacks is also needed, maybe a combination of both. This way the gun could still perform well for damage builds, but won't be nearly as potent for armor and tank builds, which is 110% needed. But as we just reviewed a minute ago, the Lady Death isn't the first time a gun or gear set or whatever has been OP in combination with a tank build, not even close. Like I said, their ability to gain more damage than they should has been an issue ever since 2016, and it's still happening as we speak. If the devs and us as PvP players want this franchise to succeed in the PvP arena in Division 3, then something needs to change in this regard if we want a more balanced sandbox. And I truly believe that if we can finally get tanks sorted out, then we could see a much more balanced environment, and one that's much more enticing and inviting to players who've either never partaken in PvP before or who were driven away from it for this very reason, whether that was in Division 1 or 2. So, how do we do that? First, I think it's important that we identify what a traditional tank role in an RPG is supposed to be, because I think this long-standing imbalance has blurred the lines there a bit. Traditionally, tanks are meant to invest into survivability, armor, whatever, and being the ones on the front line to take the aggro for the group. Now obviously aggro has always been a bit janky in the Division, and this discussion specifically we're talking about PvP where aggro goes out the window, so that doesn't apply. But in no context are tanks meant to be some top tier damage dealers and can compete with those who are speccing into damage specifically. But I do think that tanks have a place within the division, and that's in providing team buffs. While I don't certainly love everything that Gear 2.0 brought to the game, one thing I think they excelled at was introducing some really great team-focused talents, the likes we haven't seen in the franchise yet. Things like Empathic Resolve, Overclock and Tag Team for healers and support builds, and even though the talents themselves were weak, in concept things like Galvanize and Leadership are great tank talents, as well as the obviously good ones in Vanguard and Protector. I think for the future of this franchise, if we want tank builds to be balanced yet still viable and strong in team setups, then the devs need to not only ensure they lose access to overly strong damage output sources, but also provide a wealth of beneficial team-focused talents that promote tank-style gameplay. Let's give an example. I think something like Adrenaline Rush could actually be a very worthwhile tank talent if it gains some group functionality. In the context of Division 2, for example, let's say that when you're within 10 meters of an enemy, so when the tank gets close to another player, they gain some bonus armor, maybe 10 to 15%, and their teammates get 25%, as well as some small boost to weapon damage and handling. Or perhaps they make a new talent called Adaptive, where if the tank gets hit by 10 consecutive bullets, then they and the rest of the team gets 10% damage reduction for a period of time. If they get hit by an explosion, then everyone would get 50% explosion resistance for that length of time, or if they're hit by a status effect, then everyone gets 50% hazard protection. There's a ton of different avenues the devs could go down to provide tank users some really strong talents to support the actual ethos of what a tank is supposed to be. And of course, in this fictional world where tanks are balanced, I'd implement talent requirements back in like I was talking about in my previous video, whether we're talking about Division 2 or 3. So for those ones I just mentioned, maybe Adrenaline Rush would require 4 to 5 blue cores and Adaptive 6. That way the game is prompting real investment into survivability and rewarding that with group-wide buffs, not damage. And speaking of damage, like I mentioned earlier, the devs would also need to ensure tanks are no longer able to achieve any sort of high damage values. Obviously hybrid builds at 2 or 3 blue cores is a very different story, but no build that has 4 or more blue cores should ever be able to deal any kind of damage on par with a dedicated damage build. So how do we achieve that? Well, in 2 ways I think. One is, again, talent requirements. Make sure that every gun and gear talent that you provide with damage for kills or headshots or whatever, make you spec into 2 or 3 red core attributes. It just makes sense. But also what I think needs to happen, and what I don't think we've ever quite seen in the game, is proper weapon damage balancing. By that I mean at 0 red cores, your gun should basically do next to nothing in in-game content or PvP. I know that introduces some issues with bullet sponginess or non-realism, but look, at the end of the day, you can either try and keep pretending or accept the fact that Division is an RPG and you have to make decisions when it comes to your build. You can't be good at everything. A 6 blue survivability invested build should deal very little gun damage. I'm talking maybe a full 30 to 40 rounds from an AR to deplete a 6 red build's armor bar. And if they wanted to go semi-hybrid, they could spec into crit, sure, but in a perfect world, crit scales with how much weapon damage you're dealing, so it would be multiplying a very little amount to grant a not very large damage boost. Think of it like this: at 0 skill tiers, your skills suck. At 0 armor rolls, you're incredibly squishy. So why do your guns still deal moderate damage when you're at 0 weapon damage rolls? If you want to invest fully into tankiness or 6 skill tiers, then you're therefore ditching power in your guns. It makes no sense any other way. Skill users should be rewarded with powerful skills at a high investment. Tank users should be rewarded with fantastic survivability at a high investment. And damage dealers should be rewarded with high damage at a high investment. Nothing more, nothing less. It's the classic rock, paper, scissors that the devs had mentioned plenty of times, and that's where they want the balancing to be. And so if they are making a Division 3, then they're just going to have to put their foot down on that in order to make sure that that's the reality. If they don't, then we're just going to be stuck in the same tanky balancing loop that we have been ever since 2016. I'm sorry to say it, but to think otherwise at this point is just foolish. And that about does it, guys. Those are my thoughts on what I believe is one of the greatest flaws when it comes to balancing within the Division franchise. It's something that the devs have always struggled to get right, and something I feel the community has struggled to properly identify and vet for change, but there is a way for it to work. Someone commented on my previous video shaming me for being negative towards the game, but honestly, I don't see it that way, at least not entirely. If you want something to improve, you have to point out its flaws. As I'm sure you guys are well aware, I'm someone who points out quite a lot of flaws for this game on my channel, but I will never do so without providing a solution, at least one that's to the best of my knowledge and ability. That I promise. With that said, thank you all very much for watching, and if you want to be a part of positively improving this game, then be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you're new with post notifications turned on so you never miss when I upload. Leave any and all of your thoughts on this discussion and tanks within the Division franchise in the comments below. I'm very curious on how your guys' thoughts on their overall roles within the game compare to mine. I hope everyone has a great day, stay safe out there, and until the next one guys, RogueGold. Out.